Los Angeles, California. A private training floor above a wrestling gym near Olympic Boulevard. September 12, 1970, Saturday, 8:41 p.m. The room was already full before anyone important arrived. Not full in the way an arena fills, but crowded with the kind of people who did not usually stand shoulder to shoulder. Trainers who preferred space, fighters who disliked being watched, a few film people who had learned to stay quiet in rooms like this. No tickets, no announcement, no official reason to be there. Word had traveled the slow way, not through posters or press, but through pauses in conversation, through half-sentences, through the look someone gave when a name was mentioned and then dropped. It was understood that this was not an event, it was a convergence, something arranged privately and not meant to become public. Those present would later struggle to explain why they stayed. Several said the same thing in different words. It felt like something that should not be happening, but once you realized it was happening, leaving felt worse than staying. The air was warm, the kind of heat that comes from bodies standing too close and not speaking. The lights above the mat were bright and unforgiving. The edges of the room fell into shadow. People positioned themselves instinctively where they thought they would not be noticed. The man who arrived first did not need an introduction. Witnesses describe him as heavy in a way that had nothing to do with fat, 250 pounds give or take, carried low and dense, a former competitive wrestler, thick neck, shoulders that rounded forward even when relaxed. His forearms were roped with old strain, the kind that does not come from posing or repetition, but from resisting other men who refused to let go. He had a reputation for physical certainty, not bravado, certainty, the kind that comes from years of contact, where things either work or they do not. People said he liked to test claims, not aggressively, methodically. If someone said a technique worked, he would ask to feel it. If someone said it could stop him, he would invite them to try. When he stepped onto the mat, the room adjusted around him. People leaned back without realizing it. A few smiled reflexively, the way people do when confronted with something large and familiar. Someone at the back muttered that this was going to be quick. The man stretched his neck once, rolled his shoulders, and looked around as if confirming the walls were still there. Bruce Lee arrived without announcement. Several witnesses say they did not recognize him immediately, not because they did not know who he was, but because he did not enter the room the way people expected him to. No entourage, no theatrical presence. He was smaller than many imagined, around 5'7", lean, under 140 pounds, dressed simply, training shoes, dark shirt already damp at the collar. Those who noticed him did so in stages, first as a shape at the edge of the light, then as a face, then as recognition passed quietly from one person to the next. No one said his name aloud at first. It moved instead through looks and slight turns of the head. In that room, Bruce Lee felt like an outsider, not because he lacked status, but because he did not belong to that particular world. Wrestling gyms had their own hierarchies, their own ways of measuring truth. Techniques were judged by how they felt against resistance, not by how they looked or how they were explained. Some had heard stories about Bruce Lee, that he was fast, that he was intense, that he had strong opinions about efficiency. Others had worked with him on sets and seen flashes of something unusual between takes. Few had seen him apply anything against someone much larger who was prepared to resist. The challenge had not begun that night. Most witnesses trace it back to a private conversation weeks earlier, a gym corner, a hallway after training, the kind of place where voices drop without instruction. Someone had mentioned Bruce Lee's claims about structure and leverage. Someone else had laughed and said size still mattered. The wrestler, according to several retellings, had listened without interrupting. At some point, he said a single line, "Grab me."
It was not said loudly, it was not meant for a crowd. It was spoken as an offer or a test. By the time it reached others, the line had already started to change. Some heard it as a challenge, some as dismissal, some as curiosity. What did not change was the implication. If this smaller man believed his method could overcome size, here was size, standing still, waiting. Bruce Lee's response, according to those who heard it directly, was minimal. He did not argue, he did not explain, he did not accept in the moment. He nodded once. Later, when asked if he intended to demonstrate anything, he said only that he was willing to meet privately. No speeches, no conditions laid out publicly, just a decision, made and held. The terms were arranged quietly, no audience beyond those already trusted by both sides, no cameras, no press, not a fight in the sporting sense, a single exchange, no rounds, no scoring. The understanding was simple. One man would allow himself to be engaged, the other would engage him. Whatever happened after that would speak for itself. The stakes were never spoken aloud, but everyone understood them. For the wrestler, failure would mean embarrassment in front of his own world. For Bruce Lee, failure would mean his ideas would remain theoretical, unproven against the kind of resistance that did not accommodate demonstration. By the time both men stood on the mat, the room had gone quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Breathing became noticeable. Someone dropped a coin and flinched at the sound. The lights above cast sharp reflections on sweat-darkened skin. Faces at the edge leaned forward, then stopped themselves, unsure whether watching too closely would be inappropriate. The wrestler smiled, not mockingly, comfortably. He rolled his neck again and spread his stance, feet planted, knees slightly bent. His posture communicated readiness without aggression. He raised his hands slightly and repeated the line that had followed him into the room. "Grab me." Bruce Lee stood still, arms at his sides. His gaze was not fixed on the man's face, but somewhere lower, center mass. His breathing appeared slow. Several witnesses later remarked on how ordinary he looked in that moment. No visible tension, no coiling, just a man standing where he had decided to stand. The discomfort in the room grew. Some expected Bruce Lee to circle, to feint, to demonstrate speed. He did none of those things. He stepped forward once, closing the distance without hesitation.
The silence stretched. Then a small movement. Bruce Lee's lead foot adjusted by a few inches. Not a step, an alignment. His hand came up, not fast enough to blur, but not slow either. He made contact high on the wrestler's arm, near the shoulder. At the same time, his other hand touched lower, closer to the elbow. There was no grab in the conventional sense, no clenching, no visible exertion. What followed lasted approximately 6 seconds. Witnesses struggled to describe it because very little seemed to happen. There was no lift, no throw that sent the larger man airborne. Instead, there was a shift, a rotation that began at the point of contact and traveled inward. The wrestler's weight, which had been centered and confident, suddenly had nowhere to settle. His posture changed first. Shoulders rose slightly. His stance narrowed without intention. His breath caught. Bruce Lee's body turned as a unit, hips and shoulders moving together, his feet barely leaving the mat. The effect was immediate. The wrestler's face lost its color. His hands, which had been relaxed, shot outward in an attempt to stabilize. His knees buckled, not from pain, but from disorientation. In the final second, he dropped to one knee, then the other, his hands touching the mat to prevent his head from following. Bruce Lee released contact the moment balance was gone. There was no follow-up, no strike, no attempt to capitalize. He stepped back and lowered his hands. The room did not react right away. The wrestler remained on the mat, breathing heavily, eyes unfocused. When he looked up, his expression was not anger or disbelief, but something closer to confusion. He shook his head once, as if clearing water from his ears. Several people spoke at once, then stopped. Someone laughed nervously, someone else said it did not count. A trainer at the edge crossed his arms and said nothing. The psychological shift was immediate and visible. The wrestler stood slowly, testing his balance as if unsure it would return. His earlier certainty was gone, not replaced by fear, but by caution. He did not ask to try again. He did not offer commentary. He nodded once, tight-lipped, and stepped off the mat. Bruce Lee did not address the room. He did not explain what had happened or why it had worked. He picked up his towel, wiped his face, and moved toward the exit. A few people attempted to stop him with questions. He answered none of them. One witness recalls him saying, quietly, that he had training to finish elsewhere. He left as he had arrived, without ceremony. In the minutes that followed, the room filled with noise. Explanations formed quickly. Some said the wrestler had not resisted properly. Others argued that the rules were unclear. A few insisted that leverage tricks only worked once. Those who had been closest, who had seen the angle of the bodies and the timing of the movement, spoke less. Over the years, the story changed as it was retold. The weight of the wrestler increased, the time shortened, the technique grew more elaborate in description. Some denied it happened at all. Others swore they had been there, even when their names did not match those originally present. What remained consistent was the ending. Bruce Lee did not stay to claim anything. He did not use the moment to validate himself publicly. The wrestler did not seek a rematch. The gym returned to its routines. But something had shifted. In private conversations, trainers began to speak differently about balance and structure. Wrestlers who had dismissed smaller men outright became more cautious. Bruce Lee continued to refine his ideas, moving further away from fixed systems and toward something harder to label. The story persisted not because it was spectacular, but because it was inconvenient. It did not fit neatly into existing hierarchies. It offered no footage, no official record, only a room full of witnesses who could not quite agree on what they had seen, but could not forget how it felt. Even years later, when asked about it, those who were present tend to pause before answering. They lower their voices. They emphasize what did not happen more than what did. No celebration, no explanation, just a brief exchange and a quiet exit.